We'll begin. This podcast series is part of the mission of the New York Intellectual Property Law Association, NYIPLA, Past Presidents Committee, to preserve a snippet of the history of our association through the eyes of our past presidents, and to provide continuity for our century-old association's values and traditions for future NYIPLA leaders. I'm Rob Rando, the current president of NYIPLA for the 2023-2024 term. Today, we are pleased to have with us Tony Cicero. He was the 92nd president of NYIPLA during the 2014-2015 term. Tony, welcome. Before we get into any questions, is there anything you'd like to talk about ahead of that?
No, thank you, Rob. Glad to participate.
Very happy to have you here. Okay, so Tony, please tell us a little about who you are and where you are in your career today.
Sure. I'm an intellectual property attorney. I've been with the firm of Amstel, Rothstein, and Ebenstein for my entire legal career, which is now in its 49th year.
Congratulations.
So I'm probably one of the most senior persons still practicing in the NYIPLA. I'm mostly these days, aside from trying to run my law firm as managing partner, I mostly do trademark work, although I've done patent, trademark, and copyright work throughout my career, litigation, prosecution, counseling, and so on. As you pointed out, I was the 92nd president of the NYIPLA, and I remain active as co-chair of its Legislative Action Committee.
Thank you, Tony. 49 years at one firm, that's pretty remarkable today.
You won't, I don't think you'll hear that much in the future.
No, I think.
But here I am.
A great model for it. So how did you first become aware of NYIPLA?
Well, when I started, Mort Amster, Al Engelberg, Jess Rothstein were members of the association. And as a young associate, I was encouraged to participate. I forget which was my first committee, probably patent committee in those days. And I went, and of course, my first big event was to go to the judges' dinner. And I've probably been to 40 of them. But it was others in my firm who encouraged me. And remember, in those days, the practice of especially patent law was different than it is now. There were 5 or 6 or 10 boutique firms who specialized in patent law. All of the people knew each other. And in those days, in the judges' dinner, half the time people were networking and settling cases or resolving discovery disputes over a drink. So it was a different practice. And then, of course, as patent and law in particular and IP law in general expanded into the purview of general firms, now our colleagues and our adversaries may be in Texas or California or Chicago. But that in the early days of at least of my involvement in the association and before, it was a particularly efficient way of dealing with all your colleagues.
Yeah, so true. So when did you first become involved with the association?
1980, 1979. Yeah. So I was a member of various committees. I joined the board 2008, 2009, something like that. And I served on the board for a couple of years. And then I remember Mark Abate, who was the president some time ago, gave me a call and asked me if I would like to join the ladder, which, of course, in NYIPLA parlance means you become second vice president and first vice president, and president-elect and president, then immediate past president, and then you fade into the sunset. And I said I'd be honored to do so, and I did. And then I became first past president, president-elect, and president in 2015.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, whether there was a time when you decided you wanted to assume a leadership role, or did it evolve over time? You've kind of already answered that in that you.
I always did. I always really liked the association. I like the people I work with, whether at my firm or otherwise. I like practicing patent law, and I thought that the association was an impressive organization. It started in 1922. And, all the people who were people that I looked up to, in the profession were involved in leadership roles in the NYPLA. And, it was always, and so I did aspire to it. Just as I aspired to leadership role in my own firm, I aspired to leadership in the NYPLA. And I'm very, very, this is one of the, I said to somebody that this is the first paragraph of my obituary. Um, it's been a tremendous experience, which I like to continue.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more, Tony. So let's talk a little about your time as president. You've spoken a little bit about your trajectory in the organization, but maybe just a little more information on the various roles that you undertook
Well,
becoming president.
sure. So, all the officers have a particular role. I think the second vice president, at least at that time, was responsible for organizing the annual meeting. The first vice president was responsible for working on the judges' dinner and so on. I remember working on the annual dinner, and in particular, I remember that year. We had the inventor of the year is awarded, right? And I was the master of ceremonies, and the inventors of the year award was given to two researchers from some university who had cured some kind of cancer. So I remember when they finished talking, I got up and said, "Oh, great! I get to follow the guys who cured cancer." Also,
I remember that, Tony. I remember that.
and so that was, I'm sure you do, because you and I have been together in this for decades. But so that was memorable. The various the judge's dinner, of course, will always stand out. So in those days, remember, it was at the Waldorf. Right? Then
Yep.
after the Waldorf closed, and I don't know if it's ever going to reopen for this purpose, but it was pre-pandemic and at the Waldorf. So I think I said when I got up that I get to introduce Loretta Preska and Carol Ammon from Southern District and Eastern District, and Judge Davis from East Texas. And I said it's the same podium where Houston Kenyon got to introduce Learned Hand. And I was impressed with that. I thought that
Yeah.
was a big deal.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
also, I remember that you'll probably recall that Michelle Lee, who became the director of the Patent and Trademark Office and under secretary, her nomination had been held up in Congress for reasons having nothing to do with her. And it turns out that her nomination was approved, I think, on the day of the judge's dinner or the day before. So I said, before I get on to my prepared remarks, I'd like to be the first person to give a shout out to the newly elected Undersecretary of Commerce, Michelle Lee. And Michelle stand up, and she stood up, and everybody applauded. So that was, I thought that was neat. That was a neat
That's
thing
right.
to do.
Yep.
And also at that dinner, Leonard Davis, who was the chief judge of the Eastern District of Texas for several years, and had become not a controversial person, but because so many people in the NYPLA did defense work, and because the Eastern District of Texas was considered, at least at that time, to be a pro-plaintiff forum, he was there. So we invited him anyway, because it may have been my idea. If not, I'll take credit for it anyway. I always try to expand the reach of the association. And so we always have invited judges in the Southern Eastern District of New York, Second Circuit, Connecticut, and close by. So I said, well, we can't invite all the federal judges because what if they accept? What we did is we invited the chief judges of courts that were members of the patent pilot program, which was a 10-year experiment. I think it's now expired, in which if the district wanted to participate and they had judges who wanted patent cases, they'd steer those cases to the judges. And so we invited the chief judge of the East District of Texas, which was one of them, and Northern District of Illinois, who came, and somebody else. So turns out I learned that Judge Davis, like that day or the day before, had announced his retirement. So I got to be the first one to announce his retirement. So it was, it was very, very memorable. And our speaker was, well, I might just keep talking forever, but this, picking a speaker is hard
I know.
because on the one hand, you don't want somebody who's going to just appeal to the patent geeks in the room, talk about claim construction or double patenting or some other such subject so that everybody else falls asleep. So they can't do that. You can't have a very, very famous person because you might not be able to afford that person and the person wouldn't come. But you want to have somebody who's entertaining. And so you put that together. So it's a challenge. But I was fortunate enough to get Madeleine Albright. Now,
Yes,
Madeleine Albright
that's right.
was, of course, she was the first female Secretary of State. She was the second naturalized citizen after Henry Kissinger to be Secretary of State. And she was a terrific speaker. I remember she's not very tall.
Yes,
So when we got there for the judges dinner, there's this little box at the podium, and I said to somebody, I said, what am I going to do with that? I said, dope. It's not for you. It's for Madeleine Albright. So she was able to stand there. She was a lovely woman, a very, very good speaker. And the interesting thing about her that I'll remember is she always wore a pin on her dress or her jacket, and the pins often meant something. And she had a controversy, obviously, while Secretary of State, with some foreign leader who was known as his nickname was Frog or Snake or something, and she had a pin of a frog or a snake when she met him. So I thought that was neat. And, that was great. And I think the dinner was well received. And the other thing I remember is that at that time, the president got to put the president up in a suite in the Waldorf the night of the dinner. Well, you won't get to be at the Waldorf, but I was. And I said, great, that's terrific. So my wife and I went and said, go over here. And the room was the suite that the Emir of Kuwait occupied whenever he was in town. And since he wasn't in town, I got to sleep there.
yeah,
And I got lost in the suite. I mean, it was just the largest place I've ever lived in. So those are my memories of the judges' dinner, and it was particularly, it was great. And, the whole experience has been wonderful.
yeah. No, that was a memorable judges' dinner. That's for sure. Besides the judges' dinner, can you give a general overview of the various tasks and responsibilities that you undertook during your term as president?
Sure. Well, we reorganized as everybody does the committee structure because in any organization like this one, the committees are, the committees do the work, and so we had to be sure that we had the right people at the programs committee. You were on the programs committee. You headed that for a long time. And so Feike von Ryan, who's our administrator, and I worked hard to make sure we had the right people in the right committees. And one thing so that was important. We always tried to expand membership because I hate to sound like an old guy, but in the old days, if Mort Amster told me or you know, Granville Brumbaugh told somebody at Brumbaugh or pick a leader, from another firm. If they said, young fellow, we think you should join young woman, we think you should join the NYPLA and get involved, you did.
Yeah,
Nowadays, the world is different, and a challenge is to get young people involved in organizations like this one, so that don't increase your billable hours, okay?
right.
Because of the networking, because of the opportunity to learn something that you may not already know, the opportunity to meet people, to become, more well-rounded and so on. So we always tried, and I know all the presidents up through, including you, always try to do that to try and expand the membership and increase people. And we had various things that we tried to do. The Young Lawyers Committee was established around that time with the goal of getting young lawyers to participate in the association. So that was important. We sought to, have a big showing at the judges' dinner, which was always our signature event, and I think we did. But probably the thing that I'll always remember was it was during my term that we founded the Legislative Action Committee.
Yes,
Because the idea was it's one thing and a valuable thing to tell people what the law is, to provide seminars and CLEs and so on, so that people can learn what's the newest developments, the patent or litigation or patent practice or whatever. But I thought that we could try to influence things in some way. And so that was the goal of the Legislative Action Committee, to see if we could do so. And we did.
Yep.
You and I and others, Dorothy Orth and Walt Handley and Ann Hassett and others, we'd go down to Washington, and it was just what they're called flybys, or fly-ins rather.
Fly-ins, yeah.
Flyby is a different thing, but and the fly-in, people like us would go get to meet staffers of various senators or congressmen who are involved in IP issues. And what we did, we can't really take a position lots of times because we represent big companies, little companies, innovators, non-innovators, drug companies, tech companies. Our membership represents everybody. But what we can do, and we sought to do, is to say to the staffers, who are all very smart, very hardworking, and extraordinarily young.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Was to say, listen, the 5 of us, or 4 of us, or 3 of us from the NYIPLA who are in this room have 100 years of experience in patent law. If you pass this bill, I don't know if you intend it or not, but this will be the consequence. If you want that to be the consequence, okay, we're not telling you what to do, but that will be it. And I thought that was very valuable, and I think we've done that over the years. We've been involved in working with congressmen, with commenting to the patent office and the copyright office on proposed rulemaking, with the idea being that we have unique expertise. Yep. We're not pharma. We're not, the Affordable Association of Affordable Medicine. We're not the Electronic Foundation. We're just a bunch of lawyers who know a lot and who we can, in a neutral way, can kind of be neutral advisors to the people who make the decisions. I thought that was very valuable, and I'm happy to continue it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you point out, it's done on a nonpartisan basis. And I don't know if you recall, we were on the board together, and for a couple of years, I had experience with another bar association doing those fly-ins, and I had been suggesting that we, as you point out, the amicus briefs committee is tremendous, and teaching the law, we're very good at that. And what my personal satisfaction was when I discussed it with you, you made it happen during your presidency. That we formed the LAC, and to me that was a highlight.
Thank you. That was. Listen, that's what you can do. And the other thing that I didn't mention, but that was around it when I was president, and I always supported, I think we all did, was the amicus brief committee.
Yes.
Because that's the same kind of concept, right? That is telling the Supreme Court or the Federal Circuit or whomever, this is a position of people who are experts in the law and are neutral on this issue, neutral in general, and have no axe to grind, right? Because if a client of mine favors a piece of legislation, a client of yours may not favor a piece of legislation. But this is a consequence. This is what we think is an important issue. And the association submits 3 or 4 or 5 amicus briefs every year, every Supreme Court term. It's all very valuable.
And we've gotten feedback from the Federal Circuit that they actually tell their law clerks, let's see what NYIPLA has to say. And that means something. All right, so during your presidency, what was the general overview of the intellectual property landscape in terms of the issue that we were confronting as an IP community?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, some of them were the same. Okay.
Yeah.
Patent eligibility has been an issue forever, right? The Supreme Court decided Alice and Mayo, and which threw the law of patent eligibility, into turmoil. And we've been trying, without success, to get either the Supreme Court or Congress or somebody to fix what many of us think is an unsettling situation because the law of what's patent eligible and what's not patent eligible is simply unclear. And, being the kind of guy I am, I don't think unclarity, and ambiguity serves anybody's interest.
That's right.
So that was certainly an issue at the time. There, we're now in 2024, so the AIA was relatively new
Yeah.
at that time. And how that was going to shake up, especially the PTAB, that's always been so controversial because on the one hand, nobody wants bad patents. On the other hand, you don't want to stack a deck so that very large entities with a lot of resources can challenge patents in multiple forums and so on. And and that's there's a bill pending in Congress now called the Prevail Act, in which Senators Coons and Tillis are concerned about those very issues. What do you do about multiple challenges to the same patents on the same ground in different fora? Is that fair to the patent owner? I mean, if the patent owner is a giant company, well, they can take care of themselves. But if the patent owner is a startup or an entrepreneur, the people who made this country great, then you got to be sure that there's a level playing field. So that issue was always, it still is, and was prominent there. At that time, the claim construction issue had not been settled, right? There was the district courts applied the Phillips standard to determine the proper claim construction. The PTAB adopted the patent office's broadest reasonable interpretation.
Yep.
And that was a real challenge. Now, well, not only the multiple challenges in multiple forums, but the different standards of claim construction. How could that possibly be? And the patent office took care of that, I think, administratively. But that was a big issue at the time.
Yeah.
In the trademark, what had happened, there was remember eBay. So eBay did a lot of things, right? eBay.
Yeah.
eBay is a little bit after me. eBay was 2016, but eBay changed the whole world of injunctions. And courts began to say that not only does eBay apply to patent cases, but to trademark cases as well. And there's been, 6 years later, in 4 years later, in 2020 Trademark Modernization Act, there's now a presumption in a trademark case that if a party prevails, then there's a presumption of irreparable harm. So that issue of, who should get an injunction in a patent case, who should get an injunction in a trademark case, was an issue then and an issue now. There's consideration of changing the law so to kind of wipe away eBay. Whether that happens or not, I'm not sure. But that was an issue then that was of significance and is of significance now.
Yeah.
And there's always something.
Well, that was quite a lot. And the eBay case, some can argue that was the beginning of the weakening of the patent system.
Oh, for sure. And listen, that's why there are patent trolls, because you can't, not to use a pejorative term.
Right.
That changed everything. When you started, patent cases were brought by one company against a competitor.
Yeah.
And the relief was always, with like two exceptions, 100 years, was always an injunction.
Yep.
And now there's no injunction available, so now you get these, damages theories that are kind of esoteric, and they are. But you're right. I mean, that was the watershed moment.
Yeah. So you've certainly identified quite a few accomplishments during your presidency. What would you consider to be your greatest accomplishment or proudest moment during your presidency?
The establishment of the LIC, I think.
I would tend to agree with you, Tony.
I think that was a big deal. It's enduring, and it's really important. And it's good. We're all proud of the fact that people regard the association as an entity that the decision makers should pay attention to. So I would have to say that's it.
Yep.
And in general, always continue, passing the torch, down to people. I think Dorothy was next. Dorothy was next after me. They're really, Bill Connor was president of the NYPLA.
Yeah.
He was a first patent lawyer ever to become a federal judge. You know, Joe Fitzpatrick was president. Houston Kennedy was president. You know, all
Giles
famous.
Rich.
Giles Rich was president. That's the name I was struggling for. So it's being able to take something that these guys had done and pass it on is terrific.
Yeah.
Like I said, first paragraph of my obituary.
So, what would you consider might have been your greatest challenge, if any, as president?
Sure, it's a challenge that I'm not the only one who faced. Is getting younger lawyers to participate in a real way. There are all the structural changes, right? A lot of patent law is practiced in general firms. And a lot of those firms, the patent department is, or the IP department is one of many. And so there may not necessarily be an impetus to get young people to participate in organizations like ours. Maybe there's more emphasis now on billable hours than there used to be. I'm not going to go to a committee meeting when I can, do some more work on a brief and get more billable hours in, translate to a bigger bonus. As I said, it's no longer people in New York who practice patent law, it's people all over the country. But that's the real challenge, is how we're going to get younger lawyers to understand the value of the association and the value of participating in it, and in continuing something that the benefits of which are intangible. Right? You're not going to get up to 1,800 hours so you can get a bonus based on X formula. It's not going to happen here, but it's a very, very valuable experience. That's the challenge of conveying that. I try and convey that concept to young lawyers in my firm. It's not just about billable hours. It's not just about, that's important, but a lawyer is more than that. Right? A lawyer is supposed to be if you go to Italy, where my family's from, somebody who's avvocato, a lawyer, is a respected position. It's not just, a menial, technocrat billing hours. And
Right.
so the association builds better lawyers, and that's a real chance to get young people to understand that.
Yeah, or to even understand that, as you point out, in an intangible way, or in sometimes intangible ways, your career development benefits greatly from
That's right.
engagement in the NYIPLA. No doubt. I know personally it's been the case for me.
No, absolutely. Me too. It is certainly true. Somebody once asked Mort Ames to weigh in, when do I become a partner? Which the answer is, you act like a partner, and then somebody says, yeah, we might as well give this guy the title, And that's the way it is. So you got to develop, and the professional and personal development is based on a lot of things, and the association really helps that.
That's right.
I learned a lot from being in meetings with a bunch of people who I wouldn't have met. People who were smarter than I am. People who had different perspectives. People who had different experiences. People who were older. People who were younger. So that's really an important thing for the association, and that's a challenge.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, what advice can you give younger or newer members of NYIPLA if they aspire to assume a leadership role, or maybe even one day become president?
It's not. It's easy to describe, not necessarily easy to do. You have to become known. If you want to be a committee chair or second vice president or what have you, you have to become known, and you have to become known as someone who's interested in the association, who's willing to work, who's willing to contribute, and who's willing to participate. Okay, because if you're just one of 20 or one of 50 or one of 100 in some larger group, it doesn't matter. You always ask. You and I are looking for particular people to spearhead a particular task force. Who impresses you? Who do you think it might be? Well, it's not going to be a man or a woman who sits back, does nothing, doesn't volunteer, doesn't write anything, doesn't speak, doesn't do anything. Hey, those people are not going to go anywhere. But somebody says, yes, like you and I talked about someone, she's smart, she works hard, she's made a name for herself. Well, good, let's look at that person. I mean, in both where we are at the firm, or, in our firms and, and in the association, we have to look to the future. And the people who you're gonna appoint in the future to take over are the people who make themselves known. And that's by working on the committees. And there's no, every week there's a NYPLA report, the weekly publication. At the end of it, it says call for volunteers, and that's right. And
Yeah.
that's how you become a leader. You want to become a leader in this organization or any other for that matter. You
Yeah.
have to work hard. You have to get yourself known, and not as being just a loudmouth, but as someone who's got important ideas and important talent to contribute.
That's great advice, Tony. I couldn't agree more. I like to refer to those people as doers.
Right.
They're a doer.
That's it.
Right. So, any final thoughts as we wrap up the interview, or anything else you'd like to discuss?
No, just that, it's always been a privilege to work with you and others at the association. And,
Likewise.
it's something I've been doing for 4 decades or more, and I hope to continue to do. It's a great organization. It's, those of us who are in it now have the benefit of the work that others did before us. And, I encourage other people to get involved in it and to progress with it.
Tony, I will tell you, from my own personal experience, it's been so enjoyable over these years working with you on different matters. And it's a privilege. So thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Glad to do it. And anything I can do, please reach out.
All right. Have a great weekend, Tony.
Same to you, Rob. Thank you.
All right. Bye.